relationship with the maître de session, which is the head of the session in the atelier. You can get every bit of as good an education as any Frenchman. He finishes the bread, wipes his slim fingers on his napkin. And while I can't get you a scholarship, I can help you to find cheap lodging. You wouldn't need to pay much. Of course, if it's not what you want, well, no, Yulang forces a smile. It's so much more than I deserve. I would be so grateful. He nods beneficently. All I'd ask in return is that you keep me in mind if you happen to meet anybody useful. Useful? Oh, critics, important painters. No picture dealers, though. If you ask me, their goal is to squeeze the life from art as we all know it. Scanning the room, his face suddenly brightens. "Allo, Fujita," he shouts at a couple that's just been seated. The darker and more diminutive of the women turns to face them, and it's only then that Yulang sees that it isn't a woman at all. It is rather an Oriental with a severe haircut, owlish glasses, and glittering golden hoops in each ear. He waves back at Zhu Beihong, then turns back to his companion. "Fujita Sugihara," Beihong offers, turning back to face her. "That's Fujita?" The man, Yulang notes, is also wearing lipstick. Expensive lipstick, from the look of it. In the flesh, as they say. He calls himself Leonard here. Zhu signals the waiter. "His painting's a bit bland for me, lots of skinny girls and cats, but his lines are lovely, and of course he's very well connected. He's also clearly successful. As Yulang watches enviously, the Japanese artist picks several tarts from a passing pastry cart. To her own horror, her stomach growls, loudly. She crosses her arms over it quickly. "Are you all right?" Zhu is watching her with amusement. "What? Oh, of course." She fights back a flush. I was thinking about that old saying about not being able to draw a cake and eat it too." He grunts, one of Biwei's favorites. I often heard it in Berlin. "And what did you tell her?" Zhu Beihong pulls his fragile frame slightly straighter. "That if I give up my art, I'll end up eating my dreams. And dead dreams are worse than hunger. They're poison." He holds her gaze for a moment, and then he licks his teaspoon, crunching its last granules of sugar with clear relish. So that's the reading. Thank you. Now I'm going to attempt to use PowerPoint for the very first time in my life. I have brought some pictures of Pan Yulang, of some of her mentors, and just sort of general informational pictures as well as her own paintings. It was, what do I hit again? Escape? Yeah. Okay. And then this one? Okay. And then I use these here, right? Okay, great. Is this the first one? Yeah. Okay, so that's actually a photo of Pan Yulang. I believe that this was from when she was still in China, although I'm not sure. A lot of these aren't actually dated or not dated accurately. There's another one. That is one of her self-portraits. This is actually the portrait that really started this whole endeavor for me. I was at the Guggenheim Museum with my husband seeing an exhibit on modern Chinese art, and this painting was on the wall, and it just really drew me over because it was so unlike anything else that was in that museum at that time. I mean, there were lots of sort of sketching, inking draws, sort of poetry pieces, and there were some big propaganda posters, but there was nothing like this. And I saw it and I read her short biography and just was blown away. So that's what set everything in motion. That's Pan Jamwa, her husband. It's a sketch that she drew, obviously. I haven't had translated the little poem on the side, but I'm sure it says something nice about him. That's Pan Jamwa's son, who became her adopted son, and from what I understand, is still living in Anhui province today. I was not able to get in touch with him, although I did try. This is a painting that I actually use in the preface of the novel. I sort of used a lot of her paintings to try and get insight into what her character might have been like, and I really loved this one. She has a lot of motherhood themes. She never actually had children of her own, although most anecdotal accounts say that she was pregnant at least once. This was going to be on the cover of my novel in the United States, but we couldn't figure out who actually owns the secondary rights to it, so we decided not to take the risk. But it's one of my favorite paintings of hers. And this is a watercolor. But you can see she uses so much Western-style texture cross-hatching, sort of really interesting techniques that were very new to her, I'm sure, in the back.
And what years are
These are sort of spanning from, I think one of them's 1925 up to 1945. This one, I think, is 35. And I do one of my scenes sort of based around this one, too. She had a couple that were sort of luminous nudes like this, and I just thought they were really beautiful. Her colors are very, very bold in some of them. This is another motherhood theme one. Again, it's just got very bold Chinese lines, but a sort of more almost Fauvist expression. And I'm sort of interested by the fact that the baby has no face. I think that that's kind of telling. It's another nude. I actually tried to repaint this as part of my quest to understand oil painting, and I really made a bungle of it, but it was interesting to just kind of see how she'd worked. Oop, sorry, that shows up twice. That's one of her still lifes. She did a lot of flowers and fruit. This is another fan dance picture. That's another self-portrait. And she never, with the exception of one painting of herself that I've seen, she always has this very distant, sort of pensive look on her face, which I think is sort of part of her intrigue for me. It just really made me very curious about her story. That's relatively later on in her life. It's a painting of war. I don't think it's quite as, she seemed to do better in my mind with beauty, with themes of beauty, but I think that she was very torn apart by what was happening to China, both during World War II and then afterwards. This is a bather's painting, and again, I think that this may have been done in the 30s, but what strikes me about it is that's Matisse's famous bather's painting, and I feel like you can really see, I mean, down to the positions where they're sort of the angle of their heads, the fact that the third character has her back turned. It just strikes me that she's really experimenting with the things that she's seeing around her at this point. Again, this sort of seemed evocative of Matisse to me. Cezanne, thank you. The peaches, right. This is actually one of Liu Haisu's landscapes. I thought it'd be interesting to show that. That's Liu Haisu himself painting in a class at the Shanghai Art Academy, probably in the early 30s. And you can see that there's a nude standing right up there. And there's actually, there were a number of women in the classes, which is also sort of interesting for the times. That's one of Pan Yulang's sort of more traditional, she went through periods where she'd really explore more traditional art forms. And oftentimes these were horses, and that was interesting to me because, well, I had a picture of Zhu Beihong's in there. He was also very well known for his horses. That's the movie that was actually made out of the one source that seems to be around on her life, and it's a very controversial source, but it was a series of articles, sort of fictionalized biographical articles that was written under a pseudonym in a Chinese art magazine in the 1980s. And eventually they were put into a novel in China by the magazine itself. And there were symposiums trying to figure out who the writer might have been. Nobody really ever figured it out. But the story is that they were based on discussions that Pan Yulang had with her daughter-in-law. And then the daughter-in-law supposedly passed these stories along to whoever the writer was. And again, there's been lots of debate as to how authentic it is, but it's the only real source out there that people seem to fall back on. This is one painting of herself that has her smiling, which I think is sort of interesting. This was done later in Paris. I think it might have been even as late as the early 50s, I'm not sure. But you know, by contrast to all the other sort of somber, sad pictures, she's actually painted herself looking content and obviously pretty relaxed here. So, yeah, that helps, right? This is in most of her work now is in the Anhui Provincial Museum in Hefei. Hefei, China, which is in Anhui Province in China. That was where she was from originally, and she bequeathed her art to China before she died, and most of it ended up at this museum. This is a relatively new wing in the museum. It wasn't around when I first started researching, and I, again, had written them several times asking them if I could come. I sent a researcher to sort of knock on their door and try to take pictures. At that point, everything was being sort of categorized and cataloged in the basement, and they wouldn't let us near it. So, you know, I don't know whether they're supportive or not of my project, but I'm hoping to get there at some point. And that's the same painting that you saw at the museum being looked at by a modern-day Chinese person. And I think that's it. So.
What year was the photograph of the model, of the new model, the model class?
I would say that was probably in the 1920s.
Because I don't know when it was that women in Western culture were allowed into classes with naked or nude models.
Right. Yeah.
For a long time.
Certainly, if there were male models, I know. I know that continued for a long time. Yeah, I mean, I think there certainly was an outcry. I think that there are different stories. Some stories say that she was the first woman to get into the Shanghai Art Academy, but again, that's hard to confirm. I'd also heard that there were a couple other female students there when she was there. I think by all accounts, Liu Haisu was pretty progressive. So my guess is he probably would have allowed the women in, at least to paint the men. I mean, the other women. I know that when Yulong went to the Nanjing Central University, she got into some trouble at Shanghai Art Academy. I think she slapped a colleague for calling her a prostitute or something. And she left and went to work in Nanjing under Zhu Beihong. And she sort of caused another scandal because to sort of protest the fact that women were not allowed into the classes where male nudes were posing, she dressed up as a man and went in and painted one of the male nudes. And that caused a bit of an outburst. So, and I think that would have been in the early 1930s. Are there any more questions?
This literary form, like fictional biography, excuse me, cold. But are there other writers that you were influenced by?
That I was influenced by?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, they're trying to think of. You know, the first one that comes to mind, strangely enough, is Dave Eggers, who wrote his second